Welcome back to World History Explored. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, originally born as Djugashvili on December 18, 1878, and passed away on March 5, 1953, was a prominent Soviet politician and revolutionary. He held the longest tenure as the leader of the Soviet Union, serving from 1924 until his death in 1953. During Stalin's rule, the Soviet Union underwent significant changes, shifting from an agricultural society to a major industrial and military force. It expanded to become a federal union, comprising 15 national republics and covering a vast territory of over 22 million square kilometers across Eurasia. During the 25 years leading up to his death, Joseph Stalin wielded perhaps the greatest political power in history as the Soviet dictator. He oversaw the industrialization of the Soviet Union, forcibly collectivized agriculture, and solidified his rule through intense police repression. His leadership played a crucial role in the Soviet victory over Germany during 1941 to 1945 and expanded Soviet influence over Eastern European nations. Stalin was the chief architect of Soviet totalitarianism, known for his ruthless organizational skills, which eradicated personal freedoms and neglected individual prosperity while building a formidable military-industrial complex and ushering the Soviet Union into the nuclear age. Stalin's early biography was clouded by a fabricated Soviet-propagated legend that exaggerated his role as a heroic Bolshevik youth and devoted follower of Lenin, the Soviet Union's founder. At his peak, he was revered as a universal genius, hailed with titles like Shining Sun and Great Teacher and Friend, even being publicly referred to as Our Father by a metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church, despite his brutal persecution of many communities. Stalin actively cultivated a cult of personality through numerous busts, statues, and icons, though privately he likely viewed this adulation with cynicism. But why was he like this? Does this leadership have anything to do with his father's abusive nature, or the hardship he faced during his childhood? Joseph Stalin's rise to power began in his early years, marked by hardship and rebellion against authority. Born in Gori, a Georgian town under Russian rule, he was the son of a violent cobbler who abused him regularly. Raised speaking Georgian, he learned Russian with a distinct accent while attending school in Gori and later at the Tiflis Theological Seminary. It was here that he secretly studied forbidden texts, including Karl Marx's works, which shaped his revolutionary ideals. Expelled from the seminary in 1899, Stalin plunged into underground political activities, organizing labor strikes and demonstrations across the Caucasus. His fervent commitment to Marxist ideology led him to join the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, led by Vladimir Lenin. Despite frequent arrests and imprisonments between 1902 and 1913, Stalin's ability to evade harsh sentences fueled speculation that he may have briefly collaborated with the imperial political police as an agent provocateur. Stalin's early life was defined by physical toughness, a fierce will to power, and a relentless pursuit of revenge against those who crossed him, a trait influenced by Caucasian traditions of blood feuds. His rise within the Bolshevik ranks mirrored his ambition and ruthlessness, traits that would define his ascent to becoming the Soviet Union's paramount leader. Joseph Stalin's rise to power within the Bolshevik Party was marked by persistent but gradual advancement. Initially known as the Djugashvili, he participated in several policy-making gatherings of the Russian Social Democrats from 1905 to 1907, where he operated more behind the scenes than in the forefront. His notable achievement came in 1912, when Vladimir Lenin appointed him to the Bolshevik Party's inaugural Central Committee, after it split from the Menshevik faction. At Lenin's direction, Stalin authored a significant article on Marxism and national issues the following year. During this period, he adopted the name Stalin, meaning steel in Russian. He briefly edited the Bolshevik newspaper Pravda and endured his longest exile from 1913 to 1917 in Siberia. Despite personal hardships, including the loss of his first wife and son, Stalin emerged as a key figure upon returning to Petrograd, or St. Petersburg, in 1917. He initially advocated cooperation with the provisional government, but swiftly embraced Lenin's militant approach to seizing power. When the Bolsheviks successfully staged their coup in October 1917, November by the Gregorian calendar, Stalin played a pivotal, albeit less prominent role compared to his rival, Leon Trotsky. Throughout the subsequent Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1920, Stalin held ministerial roles and emerged as a significant politico-military leader. However, his ultimate ascent to power stemmed from his position as Secretary General of the Communist Party's Central Committee, a role he held from 1922 until his death. This position provided him with vast bureaucratic control and enabled him to outmaneuver more intellectual rivals, including Trotsky and Grigory Zinoviev. Despite facing challenges, such as Vladimir Lenin's opposition towards the end of his life, Stalin skillfully managed to maintain his dominance within the party, dismissing Lenin's critical testament and securing his grip on power until his death in 1953. After Lenin's death in January 1924, Joseph Stalin rapidly consolidated power by cultivating an elaborate cult around Lenin himself and promoting his own burgeoning cult of personality. He elevated himself as the chief advocate of Leninism and solidified his position by renaming the city of Tsaritsyn to Stalingrad, now Volgograd, in 1925. His primary rival, Leon Trotsky, who had once been seen as Lenin's successor, fell out of favor and was eventually expelled from the Soviet Union in 1929, later meeting his demise in Mexico in 1940. Stalin's strategic alliances and ruthless purges of political opponents, including former allies like Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin, and Rykov, cemented his control over the Communist Party and the Soviet state. He implemented a policy known as socialism in one country, emphasizing rapid industrialization through a series of ambitious 5-year plans starting in 1928. This shift marked a departure from Lenin's new economic policy, leading to forced collectivization of agriculture and severe repression of resistant peasants, particularly targeting the kulaks. This brutal process caused widespread famine in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor, resulting in millions of deaths. Stalin's industrialization efforts, while achieving significant economic growth, were marred by human suffering, including mass executions and the establishment of harsh labor camps where millions perished. He conducted show trials to scapegoat industrial managers and political rivals, using coercion to extract confessions for fabricated crimes. Despite these atrocities, Stalin's achievements in rapidly transforming the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower garnered praise from some international observers, contrasting sharply with the misery experienced by many within his regime. Stalin's personal life was marked by tragedy and turmoil, including the suicide of his second wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, in 1932. His children faced difficult fates. His son, Vasily, succumbed to alcoholism after a brief rise in the Soviet Air Force, while his daughter Svetlana later emigrated and wrote revealing memoirs about her father's private life. In late 1934, Joseph Stalin launched a brutal campaign known as the Great Purges, targeting not only perceived enemies, but also those within the Communist Party who posed potential threats to his authority. The pretext for this intensified political terror was the assassination of Sergei Kirov, a prominent party leader and potential rival, in Leningrad on December 1st. While Stalin likely orchestrated Kirov's murder to justify widespread repression, it was strongly suggested by later Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in a speech at the 20th Party Congress in 1956. Stalin used show trials as a tool to purge the party and consolidate his power. Key figures like Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky were falsely accused, forced to confess to fabricated crimes, and summarily executed in highly publicized trials throughout 1936 to 38. This wave of terror extended beyond the party ranks to include military leaders, industrial managers, and government officials who either opposed Stalin or were deemed insufficiently loyal. The purges also targeted intellectuals, artists, and professionals, causing widespread fear and resulting in millions of deaths. Stalin's motives for these purges were primarily to eliminate any potential challengers and assert absolute control over the Soviet Union. Despite eventually scaling back the intensity of the purges, Stalin maintained a climate of fear and suspicion throughout his rule, ensuring his dominance through coercion and manipulation of public loyalty. His reign left a devastating legacy of political repression and human suffering on a vast scale. Joseph Stalin's strategic maneuvers during the late 1930s and early 1940s reveal his astute yet often ruthless approach to securing Soviet interests on the global stage. Faced with the looming threat of war in Europe and the East, Stalin initially sought to maintain Soviet neutrality while preparing the Red Army for potential conflicts. His decision to sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany in 1939 reflected a pragmatic attempt to buy time and secure territorial gains in Eastern Europe, despite the eventual onset of hostilities. Stalin's complex geopolitical calculations included not only managing Soviet-German relations, but also asserting Soviet dominance in regions like Finland and the Baltic states through military actions and political alliances. The Katyn massacre stands as a stark reminder of Stalin's brutal methods in suppressing dissent and consolidating control over newly acquired territories. In a surprising twist of historical context, much like how actors adapt to different roles in films, Stalin shifted from cultivating alliances to navigating escalating tensions with Germany and eventually assuming a more direct leadership role within the Soviet government itself. His decisions during this pivotal period, including the replacement of key figures like Molotov, underscored his strategic flexibility amid evolving international dynamics. Stalin's ability to maneuver amidst turbulent global politics, balancing aggression with appeasement, left a lasting mark on Soviet history and shaped the course of World War II in profound ways. In June 1941, Germany launched a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union, catching Joseph Stalin off guard despite repeated warnings from intelligence agencies. In response, Stalin assumed direct control as Supreme Commander of the State Defense Committee and established the Military Supreme Command, or Stavka, led by Georgy Zhukov. The German blitzkrieg strategy initially devastated Soviet defenses, with the Luftwaffe swiftly neutralizing the Soviet Air Force and the Wehrmacht advancing deep into Soviet territory, occupying Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, and laying siege to Leningrad. As the Germans closed in on Moscow, Stalin resisted evacuation, believing it would damage morale. Instead, he directed a scorched earth policy to deny resources to the enemy, ordering the execution of political prisoners in occupied areas, and purged the military command to maintain control. He issued harsh directives like Order No. 270, commanding soldiers to fight to the death rather than be captured, and Order No. 227, which enforced severe penalties for unauthorized retreats, using penal battalions as cannon fodder. Throughout the conflict, both German and Soviet forces committed atrocities, disregarding international norms. Stalin exploited Nazi anti-Semitism for propaganda purposes, forming the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee to rally Jewish support for the Soviet war effort. Despite early setbacks, the Soviet resistance stiffened, and by late 1941, they halted the German advance on Moscow in brutal winter conditions. Stalin's leadership during this period was marked by ruthless determination to defend Soviet territory at any cost, employing draconian measures against perceived internal threats and external enemies alike. His actions shaped the brutal realities of the Eastern Front and had profound consequences for the course of World War II. During World War II, the Soviets teamed up with the United Kingdom and later the United States, though direct American aid didn't really kick in until late 1942. When Germany invaded, the Soviets ramped up their factories in central Russia, cranking out military gear like there was no tomorrow. They even outproduced the Germans in industrial might. Stalin lightened up a bit on the Russian Orthodox Church during the war, letting them do more and even meeting with Patriarch Sergius in 1943. He also loosened the reins on culture, giving artists and writers like Anna Akhmatova and Dmitry Shostakovich more freedom to spread their work around. They ditched the Internationale as the anthem, opting for something more patriotic, and started pushing a strong Slavic unity vibe while cracking down on anyone who seemed too cosmopolitan, especially Jews. In 1942, Stalin went against military advice and ordered a big counterattack near Kharkov, but it flopped. Hitler shifted his focus south to grab oil fields, which worried Soviet generals, but Stalin thought it was just a flanking move to hit Moscow again. When the Germans closed in on Stalingrad in 1942, Stalin told his troops to defend it at any cost. The battle dragged on until 1943, when the Germans finally surrendered, marking a huge turnaround in the war. Stalin even made himself Marshal of the Soviet Union to celebrate. By late 1942, the Soviets had started turning the tide against the Germans in the south, despite heavy casualties. This shift allowed them to go on the offensive for most of the rest of the war on the Eastern Front. When Germany tried a big encirclement move at Kursk, the Soviets pushed them back, reclaiming half the territory lost from 1941 to 1942 by the end of 1943. Stalin boosted military production by moving factories east of the front lines, out of reach of German bombers. In the Allied countries, Stalin's image improved during the war. In 1941, the London Philharmonic played a concert for his birthday, and in 1942, Time magazine named him Man of the Year. Despite being initially irked, Stalin softened when he learned Westerners affectionately called him Uncle Joe. There was still tension between Stalin, Winston Churchill, and Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Big Three, who met in Tehran in 1943. Roosevelt and Stalin hit it off, both wanting to break up the British Empire after the war. They agreed to open a Western Front to ease pressure on the Soviets, which finally happened in 1944. During the Yalta Conference in 1945, Stalin secured reparations from Germany and got the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin as part of the deal for fighting Japan. They also agreed on a coalition government for Poland, although Stalin intended to keep it firmly under Soviet influence. Stalin's focus on capturing Berlin first worried Churchill, who feared it signaled Stalin's intent to expand Soviet control over Europe. In April 1945, the Red Army captured Berlin, marking Hitler's downfall and Germany's subsequent surrender in May. Stalin, aiming to capture Hitler alive, settled for his remains to prevent Nazi relics. Soviet troops engaged in widespread looting and atrocities unpunished by Stalin. With Germany defeated, Stalin focused on Japan, moving troops to Asia. After the U.S. atomic bombings, Soviet forces swiftly defeated Japan's Kwantung Army in Manchuria, leading to Japan's surrender. Stalin's bid for a role in Japan's occupation was denied by the U.S. At the Potsdam Conference, July to August 1945, Stalin promised no Sovietization of Eastern Europe, but pushed for heavy German reparations and war booty. Germany and Berlin were divided into 4 occupation zones, with Berlin in the Soviet zone, sparking tensions with Truman and Churchill over financial burdens. After World War II, Stalin extended his control over Eastern Europe by installing subservient communist regimes, significantly increasing his influence by about 100 million people. Yugoslavia's defection under Tito dealt a blow to Stalin's unified communist front, leading to show trials in satellite states to prevent further defections. Stalin viewed the United States and Britain as adversaries post-war. Domestically, he enforced Marxist ideology through harsh measures, targeting intellectuals and artists in a reign of terror led by Andrei Zhdanov. In his later years, Stalin grew increasingly paranoid, initiating the Doctor's Plot before his sudden death in 1953, which halted further purges. Privately, Stalin enjoyed impromptu gatherings to entertain officials and dignitaries with his keen sense of humor. His achievements included rapid industrialization, making the Soviet Union a major power by 1949 with the successful test of an atomic bomb. Yet this progress came at great cost to ordinary citizens who faced hardship and shortages. Stalin's collectivization of agriculture aimed to control the peasantry but had mixed economic success. His totalitarian control through the Communist Party and state apparatus persisted after his death, leaving a controversial legacy balancing achievements with widespread suffering and repression. Well, that's it for today. What are your thoughts on Stalin's legacy? Do you think his achievements in industrialization outweigh the human suffering and repression of his regime? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more historical insights from World History Explored. Until next time, take care and stay curious.